In one of the previous videos, we talked about the way in which we ask questions. And I think that it is important to ask them. It's important for preacher and parishioners to answer them. I think that's important. Well, one of the things you can do is make sure that when you get to a text that has questions in it, answer those questions. It's not always done because some of these questions are not answered. In other words, sometimes God just asks the question and then stops and nothing happens. I think lots of scholars have talked about this, that more than likely the readers are, it's implied that the readers are going to answer those questions that are left hanging there. And I believe that's true. And I think it's good practice in a particular message to say to the folks, here's a question being asked, let's make sure we answer it before we move on. An example is in Isaiah 33, verses 14 and 15. Verse 14 says, "The sinners in Zion are afraid, trembling has seized the godless. Who among us can dwell with the consuming fire? Who among us can dwell with everlasting burnings?" Now, in this case, verse 15 is going to answer. He who walks righteously and speaks uprightly. But before you even get to that part in verse 15, the answer to the question, though, is probably no one. In other words, the expected answer, when the question is asked, who among us can dwell with a consuming fire, I think most readers are going to hear this, and especially those in Isaiah's day, they're going to hear this and say, well, no one can withstand dwelling with a God who's so holy that he will judge any sin of any amount. I couldn't stand. Could you stand before him? So I think even before you get to the specific answer given in verse 15, good practice is to say, before we go further, let's all answer this question. Who among us can dwell with a God like that, who's a consuming fire? None of us. Well, that creates part of the theology in this particular section is, what kind of person can stand before a holy God? And Isaiah is going to tell us. Now, he does answer it in 15, but that's not the only place. There was actually one I had written down in the book of the Revelation. This might be better because I don't think it actually answers it. Revelation 6:17. "For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" And the question just stops right there. That's at the very end of Revelation 6. Then you go on into chapter 7, and there's another vision. But the question just hangs there at the end of the chapter. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Of course, the answer again is, no one's going to be able to stand. So, I think it's wise, when you're in a biblical text and you're preaching through a section that has questions, if God doesn't answer that question, assume that he wants the readers to do so. He wants us to actually think it through. And I think it's an important part of a major point in the sermon, that particular section in the sermon, a thought block in the sermon, whatever you want to call it. It's an important point where you say, the question's being asked, let's make sure we answer it before we move on. And I find there's great value in the answer because oftentimes it actually solidifies for sure, this is who we really are. God is here, we are here, and what do we need in order to accomplish this? And in this case, of course, it leads us quickly to the gospel.